Back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Mike's still a little busy, so just one guy today. And I'll be honest, I'm not even bringing the stack of comics today, but wanted to talk about a movie that is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And I wanted to kind of make the pitch that I believe that it's the greatest comic book movie of all time, and that is Batman Begins, the 2005 classic from Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale, Cillian Murphy, so many greats in it. And it is often the movie that most gets forgotten in the Dark Knight trilogy, in that The Dark Knight obviously is considered to be the greatest comic book film of all time. I wouldn't debate too hard that it isn't, but I do believe Batman Begins is slightly better. I'll kind of make my case as to why here. And everybody remembers The Dark Knight Rises with its ending of some hating and some loving it. But that original one in 2005, I would say, is probably the best and I think the most important comic book movie for DC at least. And that I think you have to remember where DC Comics and particularly Batman was when that movie came out. After the embarrassment of Batman and Robin in 1998, Batman was probably at its lowest point as a character and a property in terms of its cinematic appeal. The big screen adaptations were done, they were folded, he had become laughable. Again, there were no real television projects going for him. And DC, really, as a company, had had so many failures at the box office that really it didn't look like we were going to get too many more DC Comics films. The year prior to this, you had the embarrassingly bad Catwoman movie that came out, and just DC's properties were not connecting with folks, especially Batman. And so you had this bold vision that came out with Batman in 2005. Not only does it launch the career of Christopher Nolan in terms of his long appeal as a mass market director, he'd had movies before, but this was really the launching point of Chris Nolan becoming Chris Nolan, where he can make Oppenheimer biopics that will make almost $1 billion. Christian Bale was a well known actor, but this kind of launched him to a different level. But I think the reason that this movie, outside of just the reverberations that it had, I think the reason this is the best Batman movie we've ever had is of the Dark Knight trilogy. I think Batman Begins is the only movie that isn't embarrassed that it's a Batman film. And what I mean by that is, look, I think Christopher Nolan, David Goyer, all the people who were involved with The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises did an incredible job adapting some of the source material, did an incredible job of building comprehensive narratives that people brought into, great performances, excellent things. But I think overall, what happened when The Dark Knight came out in 2008, while a great film and a movie I thoroughly enjoy and have almost nothing negative to say about it, Nolan's pitch of Batman changed. And I think what happened is it started going from being about Batman to about being Christopher Nolan's idea of a trilogy. And so Batman, we saw kind of pivot from being the character he is in the comic books to like, what if a man actually tried to be Batman? In that it started being that Batman was looking for an end point, and very early, even in The Dark Knight, you kind of get the sense that Bruce is looking for a way out of Batman. And I do think that hurt those last two movies for comic book fans of Batman. While I think we still love them, still appreciate them, still like those films quite a bit, the fact of the matter is, I think it fundamentally gets Batman wrong in that for Bruce, being Batman is not something he wants an escape from. It's not a mantle that he wants passed to somebody else. It is his sole purpose in life. And I think that is where Batman Begins more than anything gets it right. And that I think the fact of the matter is Batman Begins of the trilogy is the movie that I believe best represents Bruce Wayne as a character of any adaptation, live action, that we've ever gotten. Certainly, stuff like Mask of the Phantasm and the great animated series stuff has their place. But I think even if you go back to the beloved Keaton films, Bruce just isn't quite Bruce in those movies. The Batman Begins Bruce Wayne that we get is the best version of the character I think that's ever been in live action. Because Bale kind of plays all the facets that you need of Bruce Wayne to be successful in that film. You get the Batman part, and this was before Bale kind of ramped up the raspy voice. The Batman voice that's in Batman Begins is great, and he's suitably menacing. He's suitably, physically imposing. He has some great, lines as Batman. He just the overall action of Batman when he's flying through the sky, the way he interrogates Flash, his interactions with the villains, everything about Batman in that movie just feels right, especially because we're getting a young Batman. Right. This is essentially this movie making Batman Year One and putting into this massive adventure for the first time. And I think overall the Batman aspect is great. But I also look at the Bruce Wayne portion of this, the playboy part of Bruce Wayne in this, the brilliant scene where he buys the hotel and, brings the models in, and the way he buys the company at the end of the film back. And just the way they overall present the showman type aspect of Bruce Wayne, the performative aspect of him playing the public Bruce Wayne. While there's great moments in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises of that, certainly this movie I thought got it the best and hit very, very close to what you'd want to see. I think the other part is there's also the private Bruce Wayne that's in this movie. And I think that's the part where they never really quite got it right in the other films. Is that Bruce in this movie, you can tell, is really three different sorts of people. He's Batman, he is Bruce Wayne in public, and then he's the private Bruce Wayne who's not quite Batman but has this great relationship with Alfred, who's growing as a person. In the movie, he connects very well with Rachel Dawes, and you kind of see the internal struggle of Bruce Wayne captured in a way that we really didn't see the other films do. And so I think the actual representation of Bruce and Batman as a character and understanding that dynamic was at its finest here. I think the other part, again, because of who Batman is not most superhero characters who views being Batman as a curse or being the hero as a curse. This is his mission in life. This is what he wants to do. And I thought Batman Begins did such a great job of one, portraying the death of the Waynes, the life of the Waynes, the relationship of the parents to him as a kid, that would make you understand why that boy would go on that journey. I think the part that we always get, and because we've seen the death of the Waynes so many times, because there's no investment in Thomas Wayne, right? In Batman versus Superman, it's opening credits. We never meet those characters, right? The Keaton films, while they captured the actual death scene great, there's no part of you that ever meets Thomas Wayne, that meets Martha Wayne. In this movie, especially Thomas Wayne, you really see this caring father, this good man, and it builds that relationship. And while we comic book fans, of course, knew what was going to happen to them, for an audience to see that and to get where this boy would see this loving father and these great people gunned down so harshly and so cruelly, it instantly makes you connect with Batman and Bruce at a level that you just don't do in other films because there's such a emotionally relevant part of the film focused on that. I love the fact that it shows him growing, right? I think what we oftentimes do so often is there's such a quick transition from tragedy happens, costume on, character is the superhero. What's great with Bale's Batman is you have all of those brilliant things that Frank Miller brought in Batman Year One of seeing the process, seeing the prototype costume, seeing the weapons come together, seeing the tools come together, and that great flourish at the end where you finally see it, and that's Batman. And I think this movie gets that origin point correctly in a way that so many other films don't. And I think overall that just makes this movie stand out so much more, is that you truly feel like if you were a fan of any version of Batman, this could be the origin. What's interesting to me about this film is had there never been a sequel, I think you could have truly just had this be a Batman movie on its own. And bam, at the end of the movie, he's now the comic book character. He's now the legend. It could have been a prequel for anything. And I think they did such a great job of just capturing the essence of Batman and who he is in his world in this. I think the other part that makes this movie stand out, as I mentioned, Nolan, I think, eventually kind of got to the point where he wanted Bruce to like pass the mantle and do different things. And this movie, to me, got it 100% right. And at the end, Bruce is staring at all that, right? He stopped the League of Shadows. He stopped Ra's al Ghul. He could technically rest on his laurels, right? But he has Rachel right in front of him. Hey, when you're no longer the Batman, you can be with me, that kind of thing. And of course, Batman being Batman, he makes the classic Batman choice that no, that happiness, that thing that most people would choose, he doesn't. He is Batman. And I think overall capturing that felt so authentic to the character. I think the other part that Nolan did great in this movie that I think fell a little bit as the trilogy went on, and again, not to speak illy of those movies, but why I think this one stands out. The villains in this movie, Ra's al Ghul and Scarecrow, feel a little more comic book relevant than the other characters that are there in the trilogy. And that Bane, while I think a great villain, and while I think portrayed well by Tom Hardy, is not really Bane. He is a very ramped down version of the character from the comic books, right? It's much more of a practical, what if a man tried to be Bane kind of thing. The same thing for the Joker. While Ledger's performance is unbelievable and fits incredibly well for a dark, gritty, grounded world that's presented in these movies, there's very little crossover between the Joker of the comic books and the Joker in the film. Again, he represents the chaos that the Joker represents and does that beautifully. And there's suitable things like the creepy laugh and the costume and all that are great. It's a good rendition of the Joker, but it's not really the comic book version of the Joker at all. I think what they got right with Scarecrow and what they got right with Ra's al Ghul is, while there's some imperfections that take place, they're very accurate to the comic book characters that they played. And that it's not really confirmed, but it's hinted that Ra's al Ghul's been around a long time, or that the League of Shadows has been around a long time. Scarecrow, we get the mask, we get the fear gas, we get all that stuff. It captured the villains well enough that if you really are just a comic book fan who wanted to see those two villains brought to life, it didn't feel like they were compromised for the grounded and gritty world in the way that some of the other characters were. And again, nothing against the way Two-Face was portrayed, Joker was portrayed, or Bane was portrayed, but it did feel a little more comic book authentic in the way that it presented Scarecrow and the way that it presented Ra's al Ghul, and I think that's a huge difference. Also, even the microwave emitter weapon, right? That's one of the more ridiculous things. That obviously something that can vaporize water probably would vaporize every person that it went near, right? But again, for a movie based on a comic book, that weapon makes a little bit more sense as opposed to the grounded and gritty world that's supposed to exist in the sequels. And I think overall, just capturing the spirit of the comic books was done slightly better in this. I would also say I think this was the first time that they really got the world of Gotham City right. And I think overall, this movie, the Narrows and the way they portrayed Gotham, and I know they sort of filmed in the same locations, but this felt more Gotham City, whereas The Dark Knight and I think The Dark Knight Rises felt a little bit more like you could tell it was Pittsburgh or Chicago, wherever they were filming, whereas this really felt genuinely sort of like Gotham City. And I think, Matt Reeves obviously did a great job capturing that in the Batman, but I think the way they visually presented Gotham in this movie just felt a little more authentic than in the other movies that we had. I believe the last part and why I think this movie stands out is the heavy load that this thing carried in terms of pushing DC Comics back into the movie landscape. And obviously, look, DC bungled that with the DCEU. Maybe Superman will, turn it around this summer. But if you really look at where DC Comics was prior to this movie, the characters were all kind of jokes. The Superman franchise was in the trash in terms of after the Reeves films. There was really nothing coming down the pipeline. We got a Superman movie the year after that really didn't do well either. He'd mainly been relegated to a TV character. Catwoman's movie had bombed horrendously. Constantine came out around the same time as this did. Very much just kind of inspired by the comic. And again, nothing that was ever going to, turn into a huge box office success. And Batman Begins was interesting in that while you can look at its box office and it didn't do the greatest, the impact that this movie had is the long-term ramifications it had because it was so successful afterwards. The way the audience perceived Batman in his world, it's very similar to almost when like Frank Miller came back to writing the character and that it turned Batman around as a character. Right, it took him back to his roots of being the dark and grounded character, and that's what this movie did on such a cultural landscape for Batman. And I think everything that we got from Batman from the Arkham trilogy to the other films in this series to the current Matt Reeves films that we have, you almost owe a big 50% of it at least to this film, the success that it had and the way that it presented Batman. Lastly, I think the other part that I will say I appreciate out of this film more than the others is this is the most hopeful ending of Batman. And I think what's interesting with Batman is there is this obsession, I believe, with Batman that because he's a darker character, it means that the stories must be darker and more depressing. And I will say I fundamentally disagree with that. Now, I think you can have a more somber ending to a Batman film, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I do think if you want to capture Batman completely, I think you as an audience can leave just as inspired and happy by a Batman film as you can any other superhero. While the world that Batman occupies is dark and dangerous, and he is fighting this insurmountable obstacle of crime and corruption in Gotham that we know he'll probably never fully be able to overcome, I think there's such an obsession with Batman sometimes to make it feel like that overly oppressive thing should just make it to where the life of Batman is depressing. And I never really got that from the character, right? I think you could have moments of that. But I think why most of us connect with Batman, why we love Batman as a character, is he is literally the one guy staring into the abyss and he never blinks. He's the guy who looks and has hope, right? It may not come in the most hopeful picture like Superman floating above, and smiling at people, but Batman is a character that I believe is always based in hope. Batman believes that he can truly make a difference. And I think this movie captured that. And that you saw one man take on these insurmountable odds, overcome those odds, and succeed. And man, that ending when Gordon flips over the Joker card and you get the flourish of the music and the signal and all of it. That's Batman. That's what you want to see. It's again this lone crusader out there fighting for justice, fighting for good. And he may never fully win, but he makes you believe that one man can make a difference. As cheesy and lame as that can sound, I believe that's why so many folks connect with the character. And this ending, more than the Dark Knight, where it's a great ending of the Dark Knight. And the Dark Knight Rises ends on a more hopeful note, but again, it's Batman quitting being Batman. This felt completely within the character, complete hopeful, completely inspirational, and just made you want to see more and just reminded you of everything that was great about Batman. And that's why I truly believe this is the best Batman film of all time. No offense to The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, The Batman. I think those are all great movies. But I believe this is the best Batman we've ever seen on screen with Batman Begins in 2005. And that not only what it did for the brand, what it did for the character, what it did for DC Comics overall, but I just feel like as fans of the character of Batman, that was the movie you were waiting to see the character realized, see basically as close to a comic accurate performance from a live action as you'll ever see, and to leave the film going, man, that was cool. And I think we just don't get that too often anymore. But just one man's opinion. I'd be interested to see what do you guys think below. Hard to believe it's been 20 years since this movie came out, but definitely would love to see what you guys think below. Do you think this is one of the greatest Batman films of all time or the greatest Batman film, as I say? Or if you completely disagree with me, be interested in seeing what you guys saw below. As always, folks, thank you for watching. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.